Hello. Welcome. Last week, we talked about the good old ship that made its voyage over a sea of humanity, and it settled. And we're going to pick up the story from the point in which it settles. Actually, this image that you see up there, which is kind of cool, it is not AI. It is actually an image of a replica done roughly to the same dimensions as what Noah's Ark would have actually been, and I believe it's located in the south. Effectively, it's a museum of sorts that one can explore, and it's got all kinds of neat biblical information inside of it, and so people take day trips and enjoy Noah's Ark somehow in the southern United States. And so, but the ark settles, and we're going to just pick up that story because it's a completely changed world. Nothing would be familiar after this point. I'm sure Sully could tell us as well as anyone that if you have a deluge of water, it's going to change the landscape of the earth as you understand it. It's going to uproot things, destroy things, shift things, move things into places that they weren't before. Aside from the fact that it's going to destroy, very likely, most of the things that would have been created at that point. Maybe certain things would have survived, and arguably in history some things did survive that dated before the ark. But I would imagine the majority of those things that survived would have been things that were made of stone. But anything that would have been made out of, if you will, inferior materials or easily shifted materials, anything unstable, at this point would have been completely broken down. And so what might have been familiar landmarks before are not anymore, and beyond that, he's now in Turkey. And so he's now in a completely different area, something that wouldn't be familiar to him, and he has exited on top of an elevation of at least 40,000 feet, and here he is in a new world. And there they are, just 8 people. Whatever animals they managed to take with them. And so they exit the vehicle. And here they are, 500 miles, roughly, from his original home. You know, the thought of 500 miles to us isn't much. 500 miles is roughly the distance from like mid to tip of Cape Cod, where I live, to my native New York City, maybe. 500 miles to us is something incredibly doable with a vehicle. But 500 miles to Noah? I mean, there were probably people who never saw anything beyond 10 miles of their existence, just for sheer practicality. You're going everywhere. How? On foot? Maybe on the back of an animal? In a caravan of wagons? I mean, what are we really talking about? This does not make for huge voyages. Here he is. And the first thing he does, and his family with him, is when they come out of the ark, they immediately, poor animals, they survive the trip only to end up a sacrifice, at least in portion. And so, he makes a sacrifice, and it's an act of worship. And he does this out of gratitude, extreme gratitude. He, I'm sure, in his own mind, wondered in awe how he ever survived such a thing. And no doubt the experience would have been ghastly. It took him incredibly long to try and build this ark. He loads up onto it. It's uncomfortable. I'm sure the quarters are cramped. There's a lot of anxiety and frustration and question and grief. Because again, while those 8 souls were the 8 souls that were saved, we're not speaking to their extended family. And so there's loss. There's loss of extended family. There's loss of friends. There's loss of people that they knew their entire life. Their world has changed, and now they're living somewhere completely foreign to them in a land that does not look the same. And so when they come out, they offer this sacrifice because they are just beyond in, if I will, shock and appreciation for the fact that their feet are on ground again. I mean, goodness, if you have no horizon, nothing but sea, highest mountain peaks buried by at least 30 feet, you don't know if this is ever going to end. And it's ended. And now here they are, and they offer this sacrifice. And if I can draw a little tie into our modern experience, let me just say that at the end of extreme trial, at the end of extreme testing in our lives, it is absolutely appropriate to take a moment and consider the things for which we can be grateful. I know that there are some experiences in life that have probably taken us through the absolute mud. I know that's happened in my life. I'm sure it's happened in yours as well. That there have been experiences that you sure wish you could have just passed that one by and just skipped ahead to some other point in your life, some other chapter in the story that didn't include this, whatever this was for you. I can't necessarily control that any more than you can. Life, unfortunately, deals us the hands that it deals us, and sometimes those cards are really hard to work with. And yet, somehow, some way, we tend to find ourselves coming to the other side of whatever that was. And here we are. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I know in my life I have, where I've looked over my shoulder, so to speak. I've looked in the rearview mirror and I said, was that even me? Was that even me who went through that? I don't even feel like that person anymore. I think about a lot of things in my past where I say, I feel so disconnected from who she was. You know, it's almost unreal. It feels dreamlike. Did I really walk through that? Yeah, I really did. And I got to the other side, thanks be to God. And here I am. And now I have a chance at renewal, and now I have a chance at refreshing, and now I have a chance at dealing a new set of cards. And this is what Noah and his family are experiencing. And their first thought is, we have got to bring an offering of thanksgiving because we know not everybody got the chance to see the other side. And in our lives as Christians, there are some things that you've already gone through and things that you will go through in the future. And me too. There are still some stories yet to be told. And some of those stories are going to include dark hours. And some of those stories, their dark hours are going to blossom and bloom into incredible light on the other side. A renewal of hope, a strengthening of faith, a moment of wow. I actually got to see the other side. And it's important that we pause. It's important that we say thank you for that, because that's not everybody's story. I know that one day there's going to be something I may not be able to get through. But I got through this. I got through this moment. And for that, I am incredibly thankful. Because at the end of the day, you and I sit in the hand of an almighty God who is absolutely aware of where we are, what we are doing, how we are feeling, what we are praying. He knows the challenges that we're up against. He knows the dreams that we're dreaming, the successes we long for, the failures we're afraid of. He knows all of those things. And in the midst of that, he still maintains his keen fatherly grasp around our lives. And that tells me if I sit in the hand of Almighty God, then nothing else gets into that hand without a measure of permission. Permission from the one who is holding me. And if that permission somehow has been granted in the form of these things did come and they became a part of my life and they became part of my story, then I have no other choice but to assume that those things ultimately, like the scripture says, can work for my good in some sort of way. They may not feel good going through them. They may not bring out the best in me in the moment. But somehow, some way, I know this chapter is going to have meaning because there's nothing about my life that's frivolous. There's nothing about your life that's frivolous. Everything that happens can emerge with a measure of intention and can make you a more empathetic, more patient, more strong individual. For Noah, his story is that the whole world around him ended, but not his world. He, his wife, his children, they're still here. So let's move forward. Receiving the offering, God decides he's going to speak. And he proposes a covenant between Noah, a covenant that would actually be such a sacred pact it would extend all the way up to us now. When God speaks these words over Noah, Noah being the only audience essentially at that time, God makes a promise to Noah that will continue to live past Noah's life. into every generation that comes after him. And this pact has several facets to it that I want us to take a look at. You probably remember when we talked about Abraham, we said a covenant essentially is a blood bond, a blood pact. It means to cut, to shed blood between, kind of like blood brothers do. This bonds us forever. This is the sign that you and I are united and we share the same flow of blood. There is something between us, and it cost us both something in order to make this pledge. So the post-flood covenant that God's making, he makes it in a very serious way, and it's meaningful. Here's the first thing. He says, number one, the ground would never be cursed again. That's it. It's over. That ground ceremonially, in a sense, has been baptized by water. Everything that it was, and all the hardship and toil and frustration that was kind of reaped into that ground as a result of what Adam and Eve did, is gone. I will never again curse the ground for your sake. And then he says something else. I will never destroy humanity in any kind of mass extinction event that includes a flood. So this will never happen again. This was one and done. No matter what we see. Now, I will tell you, we could sit here and we could rifle through the news of the ages. There have been other floods, monsoons, typhoons. Those things have happened. But what God is speaking of here is, I will never again wipe humanity off the face of the planet in the manner in which I did now. This is over. And that has to be, at least for Noah, who experienced it, that has to be an extremely relieving thing to hear. And then God says something else which is quite interesting. He says, while the earth remains, seasons will be undisturbed. Now, the first thing that people will say is, but there have been climate changes over time, and there's been a shift on the planet, and some of the weather patterns have become more forceful and unusual in certain places. And yes, that is true. Again, these things are isolated. What we are sure of right now is that the sun is still going to rise in the morning, and the moon is still going to come out at night. And in some form or fashion, despite blights and despite isolated events that interrupt the flow, there is still an assurance that the seasons are going to come. What God is essentially saying is, as long as this world lasts, I need you to know, Noah, I'm going to keep it all together for your sake. You don't have to worry that it's going to fall apart. My eyes, my hands, my care are going to sit over it. I'm not going to destroy everything that you love and all that you see again. I'm not going to change your world in these radical ways. I'm going to remain as faithful as the seasons that you see. That's essentially what God is saying. I am here. I am present. I have restarted it, and it will remain as it is. These are assurances a person like Noah would need to hear. And can I say, because you know I always want to draw those lines to our experience as Christians. There's a faithfulness in God. The sun's going to rise. The sun's going to set. The day is going to happen. The seasons of our lives will come. But God is so keenly aware of where we are, what we are doing, and what we need. And it is not his desire ever to destroy us. His desire is to encourage us. His desire is to build us up. His desire is to create fortitude in our spirit so that we can withstand the changes when they come. But he is unchangeable. And if we can rest and rely on the fact that he doesn't change his mind about how he sees us, and he doesn't change his mind about our value to him, then we can move with those waves when they start to happen, because we know the truth is everything around me could be sinking sand. But I am still in a solid place. I still stand on a rock that's bigger than myself. What else changed? Now, these are the things that are hard. The first one is hopeful. There's a call from God. He basically tells Noah and his sons, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth. In other words, get down to business, guys, because we got to restart this whole thing now. We need humanity. So have your families, have your children have children, basically spawn out and make sure that we can refill this planet. And they did so. We're here. We're on a beautifully populated planet right now. In fact, there are some areas of our world where they've had to restrict births because they're so overpopulated. We did it, okay? But then there's a couple of other things that are really tough to wrap the brain around. And I need us to understand that these two things sit as, if you will, the repercussions of a sinful world and how we have an effect on everything. Now, I want to really nail this home, because often when we think about sin, we think about humans. Humans sin against each other, humans hurt other humans, right? That's what we normally think about. And then, if we really want to be spiritual and take it to the next level, we say humans sin against each other, humans hurt humans, and humans also hurt the heart of God and fracture their relationship with him and have to either ignore that completely, walk their own way, and let the chips fall where they may in judgment, or humans will seek to try and restore that relationship with God and yield to God and let God be God. But we don't always think about our effect on our planet and our effect on creature kind, as I like to say. Sin had an effect on that too. I'll give you two examples. One of the things that God said to Noah is, now there's going to be a natural fear and dread that's going to exist between humans and animals. He literally says to Noah in these words, the dread of you will be on the earth. I find that intensely frustrating. And the reason I find that intensely frustrating is because it shows me our plight when we were supposed to be the ones who had dominion over all of the animals. We were essentially, if you will, planetary zookeepers. All right, we were supposed to keep a measure of order and have a measure of fellowship. I mean, you go from the scene of Adam naming all of the animals, not really finding a companion for himself, but still he's having this relationship of being able to interact with them enough to be able to give them names and assign whatever their species is. And then we have the scene where Eve is having a conversation with a snake, and apparently this is not a big deal because there's no wow factor for her. So you wonder, is this commonplace? Is this normal behavior? Is there some form of communication between them? I don't know. Mysterious stuff. But now we see we were so full of evil. We were so full of nastiness in our hearts that not only did God have to reset the entire world, but afterwards he says, you get to occupy this planet, and I will be faithful and true to you. But there is now a natural fear that's going to lie in the hearts of the things you were supposed to be able to guide and guard. Now, we find this all the time. It's normal to us, so we don't think about it. But how many times have you seen an animal, perhaps, maybe we'll say a feral cat or something along those lines, and its first inclination is to run from you. You come nearby, skitter, off it goes. There's this protectiveness, and it's either going to come in the form of running away or lashing out, trying to defend itself. But now there's something different. Aside from truly domesticated animals, when things are allowed to sort of live in their natural state and be guided by only their instinct is not necessarily to trust us without a lot of effort being put into that. But then there's a third thing, and I want you to pay attention to what this is, because prior to this point, we did not have this permission. The third thing that God says is that animals were now permitted as food as long as the blood was properly drained, which is really tough because we know the concept in the scripture is life is in the blood. And so literally he says, part of how you feast now, not only are you a dread, not only do you invoke fear, but part of how you feast now is to make sure that every bit of life is out of something and then you can consume it. That literally, it feels like we are literally feasting off of death. That's a big change, guys. And it's not natural. And I want to really nail this home because I'm noticing, and I'm sure you guys have noticed too, it's really sad that in our current world, we have to have federal laws to protect animals because of what humans do to them. The ways in which they abuse and take advantage of it. But there's something screwy in our hearts now. And God's kind of highlighting it there, saying, no, it's changed. You're not guardians anymore in the same way. Now, there's a bit of brutality in this. Well, this is hard, and this would be a tough pill to swallow. And this was not exactly, I'm sure, music to Noah's ears, because it represents a change that really shows a downward slope. It shows more of a separation. It shows animosity. It shows enemy-like behavior. It shows predator and prey. And this was not what we were supposed to be as humans. This was never supposed to be natural. Now, unfortunately, post-flood, it becomes our world. Let's go ahead and take a look at Genesis chapter 9 together. I'll read it here so it comes through on the mic. But we're going to Genesis chapter 9, and we're going to specifically read verses 4 to 6. This is important. It says, "But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood. Surely, for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man. From the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. As for you, be fruitful, multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth." It's important to understand that God is making a very established statement here. He's saying, I need you to understand how this works. Because now that you had all these evil imaginings in your heart, continually, day and night, something that rose up to me as really a profane offering. It's all I heard all day and all night. I can hear your thoughts, essentially. I know what's in your heart, and you spent so much time with toxicity in your soul. And he says, now I need you to understand the rules of the road. The rules of the road are, you were created as my image. You are an image bearer. And everything arguably is made by the hand of God. It came out of nothing into something because God willed it. And he was not pleased at how we treated that gift. And so he literally says, now there's going to be problems, because in that fear and dread, I need you to understand, I am going to require out of every man's hand the blood that has been shed. So if a beast, and he literally says that if a beast takes your life, I will require its life. If a man or a woman takes your life, I will require theirs. Because every time we destroy another person, we destroy an image bearer of God. It's important for us to understand that from the beginning, God was establishing the sanctity of life. Now, we treat life as a very fluid thing these days. My goodness, in our country, we can't even define when life begins. Unfortunately, there's so much that we struggle with in this area of life. I know, Mariah, that you're in the healthcare field, so you know, probably more than I do, that even to this moment, euthanasia among seniors and those that are infirmed and diseased is a topic, and there are some states that actually allow it. And so we have a funny relationship with life in this culture, a very funny relationship. And for us, life is a bit of a hard thing to define when it ends, when it begins, when it's considered viable. For God, there is absolutely no question. Life is precious. Life is to be protected. Life is to be guarded. And the rules for Noah now are, you take it, you lose it. You don't get to just frivolously spend it because it means something. And you know what? In our current world, guys, feels like there's not a lot of things that mean something. Relationships. People jump from relationship to relationship, marriage to marriage, home to home, job to job. Oh, goodness, I'm in the HR field. You can't even find people at this point in time who have greater than 2 years experience in one place. Because the rules of the road have changed, and people no longer value long careers in one particular place. I'm not just talking about a specialty, I'm talking about a place. There's so much bouncing because there's general lack of commitment. Commitment is not something that's valued in these days. Plenty of people who are living together for years and years and years, decades and decades, never actually putting a marriage into effect because, again, commitment is almost like a dirty word in this society. Committing to your identity, committing to your standards, committing to your politics, committing to your religion, commitment at all. We have families where people are divorcing family members, not even marriages. We're talking about kids who literally divorce their parents. It's possible to do that in our courts. You can literally do it. Many celebrity children have done it because they want to manage their own finances. So they literally divorce their parents and go rogue. We don't have an existence that values life or what life can mean. What life should be filled with that's stable. God is talking about it all the way back then. It's like he sees down the road and says, you just don't get how precious this is. How precious these moments are. How precious these people are. I think back to my own home state, right? We share our state. And not too long ago, I'm reading in the news. I'm watching a video of a person who is set on fire while she's sleeping in a subway car. And everybody took out their phones. Oh, wow, man, do you see that? That's a person. Yes, it is. Can you help her? No. Because the viral video is worth more than the human life. These are the times that we're living in. And understand, when we're talking about Noah, we need to know that Jesus later on in the gospel says, in the last days it shall be as in the days of Noah. People will be feasting and partying and doing their thing with no thought to repercussions. And all of a sudden, boom, coming of God will split that eastern sky and everybody's caught with their pants down. It's important that we understand that we can't let this get in our heart. This attitude of not valuing the life of our brother, our sister, the stranger, and ourselves. Because these all are part of the image of God created by his hands. And because of that, there's substance there, and there's promise there, and there's hope there. You've never looked in the eyes of a person that God doesn't love. You've never looked in the eyes of somebody that God didn't dream over. And every life that's snuffed out was a life that had a longer story in the mind of God. And so it's important that we get that this is sacred stuff we're talking about here. And so there's a symbol that's given. At the end of this conversation, God has said all these things, and these concepts have come forth, and all of this has such gravity and importance. And then he says to Noah, and there's going to be something that appears in the sky, because he knows from this point forward, weather patterns are obviously changing. This is not the days of the garden where you have the dew that's rising up from the ground in the morning and just covering everything, and oh, it's so lovely, and you barely have to maintain it. No, weather patterns, everything's changed. And it stands to reason that any time any rain falls in the future, Noah's probably going to have some serious PTSD. He's immediately going to be like, please, God, not again, right? God forbid there's some sort of deluge, right? And so God tells him, no, I need you to know that everything that I've said right now, it's serious stuff. I need you to pay attention to it. But I'm also going to make sure that there's always a symbol for you, something that will appear in the sky. Something that will remind you in moments where you might be given to fear or anxiety because you see circumstances around you that kind of mimic or echo experiences that you had in the past with a flood. Every time that atmosphere quite literally is set in the same way, I'm going to make sure that an arc appears in the sky, a rainbow. An arc of color is going to appear in the sky. And when you see that, I want you to pay attention to that. Because that for you is going to be a reminder that I have not forgotten. That I have not changed my mind about how I feel. That I'm still committed to my covenant to you. This sacred symbol has been used in a lot of forms and functions, and it's been co-opted by a lot of different kinds of groups. And that's unfortunate. It's become a symbol of a lot of different things, but in its inception, in its moment of kind of being highlighted to humanity, it was meant to be a sign that God does not forget. So, Noah has these 3 sons. From Noah's 3 sons, whose names are Shem, Japheth, and Ham, the entire world has to be repopulated. I mean, that's what has to happen here. We need the world to move forward. It's going to continue to spin on its best in that first, if you will, generation. We've got 16 grandchildren. And so at that point, with those 16 grandchildren, now we're going to have each one of those have children. Very rapidly, we start to rebuild things. But each of these kids is pretty important in this story and has their place. I'd like to read a few scriptures so we can kind of familiarize ourselves. Let's go, staying in Genesis chapter 9, let's scroll ourselves down or turn our page down to verse 20. And let's read a rather unfortunate story, shall we? As if the story we just came out of wasn't unfortunate enough, there's more. And here's what it says. It says, "And Noah began to be a farmer." Well, that's pretty wise. We need to eat, right? But he plants a vineyard. Now we have access to grapes. Awesome. We have access to grapes, and we can crush them, and we can turn them into juice. But alas, we don't have refrigeration yet. So when we leave certain things out, they begin to ferment. And when they ferment, that kind of turns into something interesting to partake of. And it says here in verse 21, he drank of the wine and was drunk. And he became uncovered in his tent. Yes, as that suggests, it means that Noah lost his inhibitions and was not clothed at all. And so he's in his own tent, and he is naked and drunk. And so this is not exactly making for a great and dignified moment. I'm gonna draw a line here because I think it's really important that we understand there are going to be moments in which we, in a sense, may see the vulnerable side of our brothers and sisters. We may see them in failure, right? I know this is a literal story of somebody who was unclothed in his tent and drunk out of his mind. But let's take it out of that context for a moment, and let's put it into more of a modern context and more of a context that I think we'll find each other in. There may be moments where we find each other in failure, in sin, in bad attitude, in low points where we're not speaking kindly, thinking kindly, or acting kindly. You and I may find each other in those places because here's the truth. If we're doing church right, we're doing church together. And we're living life together. Which means there's going to be points in which we will be exposed to each other more. I will get to know more of who you are. You will get to know more of who I am. You will get to know my flaws and my faults and my foibles and the parts of me that are unpolished and unrefined. And I will learn the same of you. And if we know these things about each other, it's really important that we understand the New Testament talks about the body of Christ. And it says that in our natural bodies, we cover the parts that bring us shame. It's speaking to clothing, essentially. I walk around making sure that I'm covered because it would be embarrassing not to be. And the apostle kind of makes this jump and he says, if you already know in your natural body that there are some aspects of yourself that need to be covered and not be exposed because it causes embarrassment, then do the same for your brothers and sisters when you find them in those moments because they're part of your body. Cover them. Now, does that mean that you cover up sin and pretend it didn't happen? That's not what we're talking about. It's a matter of don't stab people's dignity. Don't stab them and kill their spirit. Help to cover them, and covering them may mean bringing them accountability and restoration and forgiveness and encouragement and being that person that doesn't slap them a second time when their own actions have probably beaten them up good already. You ever felt beaten up by your own actions? You ever feel like, oh my God, I'm such a dope. Like, why did I do that? I can't take that back. I can't unsay those words. I can't undo that action. Yeah, we've all been there. And that's why we should be sensitive to it and look at our brothers and sisters and say, no, I'm not going to bring you any more embarrassment than you probably already feel. Not going to expose you. You're part of the same body as me, and therefore you're important. And if I know that you need covering, I'm going to cover you. But That's not what happened for Noah, and it had an, if you will, eternal consequence. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Noah quite literally is uncovered. And you would figure that if you are one of few people that are on the planet and your sons are nearby, somebody would throw a blanket on the old man, okay? And not mock him and not turn this into a thing, okay? He clearly made a mistake, and he may not have realized what he was even doing. He became a farmer. He's probably still learning. He planted a vineyard. He crushed his grapes clearly. He bottled it in some sort of way, put it in vessels. It went through its natural process and became alcoholic. Did Noah know? I don't know. There's nothing that suggests that Noah understood the ramifications of that. But what we do know is he enjoyed it, probably enjoyed the taste, took too much, didn't realize maybe the effect that this would have, and boom, now he's in trouble. Well, when somebody's in trouble, they need help. They don't need further hindrance. It says here, Ham, in verse 22, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, told his two brothers outside, but Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward into the tent and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, so they did not see him. So Shem and Japheth realize this is an undignified moment, and they respect their dad. And in honoring him, when they find out this news from Ham, are kind of like, okay, we need to do something. But we also don't want to bring him any embarrassment. So they go in backwards and have a blanket laid on their shoulders, and at the point, probably when they feel his feet, drop it backwards so he's covered and make sure that everything is decent. Ham didn't do that. Now, Bible scholars have sort of gone back and forth about what could have happened in that tent. Because seeing your father naked by accident is not something that should be accounted against Ham. Something else had to have happened. Now, there are some people who try to suggest that Ham may have done something inappropriate to his dad. Scripture doesn't really give us that. We do know that he ran and told his brothers, who had a distinctly different reaction than him. It may be, and most scholars agree, it is very likely that Ham, in some sort of way, dishonored his father by mocking him. And likely in telling it to his brothers, thought this was a really, a real riot of a situation, and probably laughed it off or tried to get them to join in and mock the father. We know that something happened because when we continue reading, this is what Noah's response is when he wakes up. It says, so Noah, verse 24, awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. Well, what could he have done? This is where scholars are like, something happened. Something happened in that tent. It's likely mockery at the very least. Otherwise, it's something inappropriate. But either way, what Ham didn't do is take the opportunity to zip his lip and just cover his dad himself. If he had happened upon his father and found him in this situation, he could have easily just tossed a blanket on the old man and been done with it and not said anything. But he carried the tale of what had happened to his father to two other people unnecessarily. Can I just say, gossip is still something that God frowns on. And exposing people's shame is still something that God frowns on. That is not something that God takes kindly to. It is not ever going to be anything that he approves of. Not a God who is so interested in mercy and grace and restoration, as opposed to mockery and creating contentions. But this is what happened here. And here's what it said, like, whatever Ham did, man, his father was fiery, because it says, when he knew what his younger son had done to him, he said, cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. And he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. And Noah lived After the flood, 350 years. So all the days of Noah are 950 years, and he died. Wow. So a curse is put forth to Ham, but it's actually not directed at Ham. It said earlier that Ham was the father of Canaan. So whatever he did, Noah was like, you know what? I'm skipping right over you, and I am going straight for your kid. Cursed is your son for what you did. Oh my goodness gracious. It's a curse that was going to pass right down to his children. Cursed, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. Meaning he is always going to be subservient. He is always going to be in last place. And he is always going to be looking with a measure of longing towards his brothers. So let's get into this a little bit further. Shem, that's the name of one of the children. It means renown. And this Shem was going to be exalted. His descendants were going to be especially blessed. If we follow the biblical lineage, we are going to find that Shem's seed is the seed that the Messiah was ultimately going to come through. That is the ancestral line of Christ. Now, a blessing was also offered to Japheth. He was told that his descendants would be enlarged. Well, biblical version of enlarged means numerous, prosperous, and productive. So these were going to be great, great people who were going to have a lot of substance and tons of descendants, and really they were going to flourish on the planet. Now, Genesis 10. I highly encourage you to take a look at it at some point if you haven't already. Please know, it's quite a read. But Genesis 10, the chapter right after this, discusses those descendants and how they broke out and how they became family units and where they traveled to and all those things. It is actually a table of nations that stands alone in ancient literature as the most thorough genealogical explanation of people groups ever. In fact, many genealogists have actually used that to be able to trace where people migrated all over the planet. Genesis 10 is one of the most perfectly recorded frameworks of any such information. It tells us ultimately that all people of the world are related to Noah as a common ancestor. And many of the names and their roots have been substantiated with archaeological discoveries to prove, yeah, that actually was that clan. That was what it called itself. Those were its descendants. They have found writings. They have found plenty of evidence that basically shows us over the last century that that recording in Genesis 10 is wildly accurate. The family of Shem, if you read Genesis chapter 10, and I will spare you the begot so-and-so begot so-and-so and went to this land and begot that one. We'll get past all the begats and begots, and I'll tell you exactly what it was. Family of Shem ended up moving eastward towards Asia and Assyria. They were part of what essentially formed the cradle of civilization. Those of Israeli, Middle Eastern descent, they have a clear line that traces them to the lineage of Shem, and this is why Messiah comes through Shem. The family of Japheth ends up settling primarily in North and Western Europe, and that means that because they settled in those areas down the line, they were the ones who ultimately fulfilled that promise and that prophetic proclamation of being enlarged, because they ended up being those who explored, colonized, and settled much of the other side of the globe eventually. So in a sense, if you have any ties to Europe in your lineage, you are a descendant of Japheth, very likely, because that's where his descendants went. And then we have Ham. The family of Ham, Ham meaning burning heat, ended up migrating southward to the warmer climates, Arabia, Africa. Now, I want to tackle something right now, because this has come up before when I've taught, and I want to slam it back in the box now, okay? And I want to slam it in this box for a number of reasons, because I also know that, and I'm going to say something here, and I'm going to say it as sensitively as I can. I recognize that our area here in Idaho is not known for diversity. And I have heard the effects of that lack of diversity in the comments among people and even within churches. What am I saying with that? When you're not exposed to different kinds of people, and you don't learn how to make friends with other kinds of people because they're not necessarily accessible, it's very easy to assume stereotypes are correct. And it's very easy to have discrimination foster in your heart. Because we are often afraid of what we don't understand. And I have to say that when it comes down to the church, some of this over time has bled through even within churches. I have unfortunately spoken to people. I remember we had somebody who was a part of an apostolic church in Ohio, of all the places, in Ohio, who came and visited New York, came to worship at our church, and was really surprised that the black people and the white people were sitting in the pews together because, as she put it, in our church, they know they're supposed to sit on the other side. Yikes. Dude, this is the church of God, the church that God created, the people he created, with tons of diversity built into them naturally. Like, what are we doing right now? But I pause here because, unfortunately, why does this have to do with Noah or Ham? It's because when Noah put that curse on Ham's descendants and specifically put it in the name of Canaan, I have actually heard people develop doctrines, and I will tell you, early on, and I recognize that we're live streaming, but early on in the LDS, this was very much embraced, that the sons of Ham were black people, and that is why they were cursed. And so dark skin was considered a curse. In fact, there are portions of the Book of Mormon that actually say that when God beautifies you, he makes you white and comely. Comely meaning attractive. And so whiteness, if you will, was considered a sign of holiness and righteousness. Please. Scary stuff. So, but when you really think about it, there are so many errors with this idea. And I want to make sure, because again, the whole point of Search for Truth is that we search for truth here, and we take all that is false and dispose it. Part of disposing what's false is understanding that as a church, we can't have room for that kind of thought process because it comes out in how we minister to people. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what you are. I don't care about the color of your skin. I don't care what nation you were born in. None of it matters when we come to Christ. None of it matters before. It just doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is open arms and having no sense of thinking we know what a person is just by their ethnic background. Let me just say, Ham, just because his descendants ended up in Africa, does not mean that when we talk about servitude, that it's the curse of Noah on them, that's the reason why they became slaves in the West. No, because this is literally ideology that sits in a lot of churches. No, 1,000 times no. The curse was very specific. The curse was on Canaan. Do you recognize that name Canaan as being something you've heard of in Scripture? Have you ever heard of the Canaanites? Understand, this has no racial implications whatsoever. It actually presented itself in the form of Ham's children's descendants, the Canaanites, always being at war with the Israelites. This has nothing to do with Africans. This has nothing to do with black people. And to suggest that God would allow a curse to pass to an ethnicity is wild. And so I just want to dispute that now because it's literally come up when I've taught Bible studies before. And it drives me absolutely insane. That is not what's happened here. The struggle is in the form of the wars and the wars over land masses, most specifically. Has nothing to do with anything else. In this regard, Canaan was always in a place of service because unfortunately, the Canaanites lost repeatedly in those wars. Okay? And ultimately, the Israelites did attain their land. Okay? That is all that's happening here. It's really important that we understand that. So now we have this dilemma. And the dilemma that we have is that God has made it very clear. I want you guys to be fruitful, I want you to multiply, and I want you to fill the planet. But they don't do that. They multiply, yeah. But what they end up doing is they end up inhabiting this area in the plains of Shinar. And what they say among themselves is, here's what we're going to do. I mean, I know that God said we're supposed to disperse and like inhabit the whole planet, but before we get to all that, let's get ourselves in the plains of Shinar. Let's get all of our power and let's centralize it. And they make this declaration, let's build a name for ourselves. As they go to build this name for themselves, they decide that they want to create a beautiful tower in honor of that name. Next week, we will get into the Tower of good old Babel and all the implications of that. Because while I've told you where Shem, Ham, and Japheth's children end up, they're forcibly sent in those directions. We haven't quite gotten there yet. That's where they'll ultimately be. But for right now, they're hanging out in Shinar thinking that they can do some cool stuff. I'll draw this final line. Really important, really, really important, that at the end of the day, we recognize that God's commands are not arbitrary. When he asks for something, he has reason behind asking for it. When he tells you to go, you do well to just go, okay? And when he tells you to stay, you do really well to stay, okay? When we go outside of the go and the stay, and we decide that the go is a stay and the stay is a go, unfortunately, we end up reaping some rewards for ourselves that we didn't quite want. Those were not the prizes I was hoping for. Yes, but they're the prizes that you get because you play stupid games. You win stupid prizes. And the Tower of Babel sits as a perfect example of what happens when we're motivated by making sure we look great. Be careful. It's not about our egos. It's not about our pride. It's not about our names. It's not even about our legacy. It is far more about, am I hearing the voice accurately? And more importantly, when I hear that voice and I know I've heard that voice, am I doing what it says? All of the problems that we're going to encounter in the Old Testament stroll right on back to one simple facet. I heard the voice, sure did, sure enough, sure enough. Did I do what it said? Nope, but I did a thing. And so as we go through the Old Testament, you're going to see several times that we did a thing, and the thing came back and bit us hard. So we'll stop there.